First, we're going to call for a motion and second to grant leaves of absence to Commissioners Chamberlain and Pierce. Commissioner Chamberlain's out of town and Commissioner Pierce is ill.
So move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Second, call for a motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular commission meeting of January 10, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now we'll ask Curtis for the executive director's report and his remarks.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Commissioners. Nice to see everyone this morning. Congratulations for everyone who doesn't have the flu. I'd like to first acknowledge the safety champions that are currently on rotation up here. You'll see, again, a good variety of folks in different parts of the port who have really exhibited a commitment to our safety priorities throughout the port operation, some admin and some, well, they just went off, but also some maintenance employees, some really great leaders. Elise is actually helping on the commission on a regular basis, and I think is here somewhere in the room. But just a really great effort again this last month on safety. Stan, I wonder if you'd help us with a safety moment this morning.
Certainly. Today's safety message is going to be about traveling traveling safely. You know, spring break's coming up. You may all be planning a family trip, or you may be planning a trip alone to a new city or country. And it's never easy sometimes when you're in unfamiliar places. Sometimes it might be a little scary. And so I thought I would share just a few safety tips to make sure that your trip is a safe one. Share your travel information and stay connected. Before you leave, share your itinerary with a trusted friend or a family member. And then when you're on your trip, do try and stay in contact with them on a regular basis. Find out whether your mobile device has roaming capabilities in the location that you're going to. And if it doesn't, sometimes you can make arrangements with your carrier to add that service. Or once you get there, you could also, if you don't have it, you can rent a phone so that you can stay connected. 2, scan a copy of your passport and ID. I know many of us think about this. The good thing to do is to email it to yourself and to a family member or trusted friend. It's also a good idea to take a photo of it and store it in your phone so that if you are out and about and your passport is locked up in a hotel safe somewhere, you'll have access to all of your details. And plus, if it's stolen, getting a replacement will be that much easier. On travel days, it's also wise to carry your passport separately from your money and your credit cards. And it's also wise when you're out and about during the day not to take all your money and all your credit cards with you. It's wise to split that up. Take just what you need, one credit card, some money, lock the rest of it into your hotel safe. And that way, if you get pickpocketed or held up and robbed, you still have the resources you need for the remainder of your trip. Familiarize yourself with your destination. Be aware of any safety concerns as well as all of the local customs and etiquette on where you're going. Know the local number of, in case you have an emergency that you can call the emergency number. The State Department also provides updated safety information whenever possible in every country in the world, and you can visit it's called their Smart Traveler Enrollment Program webpage, and there it has lots of information, but you can also register your travel plans with the State Department in case there is an emergency in that country. They'll know how to contact you. Choose your ground transportation wisely. According to the World Health Organization, motor vehicle crashes are the #1 cause of death for U.S. citizens abroad. And whenever possible, travel in a vehicle that is in good condition and has working safety belts. Talk to locals about the safety of the public transportation system in your location and also on local bus companies. And if you are driving, be familiar with the driving laws. And I know we all have our electronic devices, but sometimes GPS isn't available where you may be, and you may not be able to get connected. And so it's always wise to have an actual map with you. And then ensure your lodgings are safe. Keep your door locked with the security chain fastened. Know the emergency escape routes from your room. And stay away, if you can, from ground floor rooms where window entry is possible. And don't answer the door if you're not expecting anyone at your hotel room. And if someone does knock, it's always wise to call down to the front desk to verify that someone from the property needs access to your room. And then always be mindful of your surroundings. Traveling to a new place and being safe, doesn't mean that you need to cower in your hotel room, but don't let yourself get so distracted by sights and sounds that you let your guard down. And finally, be careful that you don't become too fast friends with people you just meet. Give that relationship time to earn your trust. It is risky to share your life story with people that you may have just met. So with that, Curtis, that's my safety message.
Thank you, Stan. I'm looking at you, Vince. No more personal details. Really appreciate that. We just completed a trip about a week ago to Singapore, and as an additional note on the passport piece, if your passport has recently expired and you get a new one, you should probably bring your recently expired one with you as well. Oftentimes, one piece of data as you're traveling is not enough, and you'll need to show that you actually are the person that was on your old passport as well. So it's just a good message and very timely for a number of port employees. Thank you. A number of updates this morning. First on Marine. As I think you all know, we had our first vessel call in a couple years at T6 last month, January 23rd and 24th. It was a Swire Shenking, which called and actually had a great visit. It was a combination of both containers and Western Star trucks that were loaded. The process went very well. The ILWU performed very well, and we're happy with it. The next vessel call is in a couple weeks here, and we're very hopeful. Those trucks, Western Star trucks manufactured here on Swan Island, are bound for New Zealand and Australia. It's just another great manufacturing export story for Oregon and for the port. We still have a long ways to go at T6, and we'll keep slogging away. I really appreciated last month's conversation about the future there, and we'll keep working. Second, PDX Next, you'll note we're almost finished out here with our quick turnaround facility, due to be completed and opened in the first week of March. Great news. You'll also note that we've got now a crane or two on site here for Concourse E, the extension outside the port windows. We're just notified that the pilings are going to be set here in the next couple months, so there'll be lots of building vibrations here, but a couple hundred pilings taking the building down to bedrock and providing for more resilient building at Concourse E. We've budgeted just over $200 million for this project, and as they say, you lay your money down and you play your part. Our job now is to get it done on time and safely. So you'll note, if you get a chance, a giant mural now at what was the end of Concourse E is now the entry to the new building, and there's a large mural there describing or essentially showing what that addition will look like in the future. We also have online a pretty cool time-lapse version of the erection of that mural, so it's a pretty cool thing to check out. A few more things at the airport. Every lunar year, it's tradition to invite the Lions to dance and ward away bad spirits. We celebrated that last year out on Concourse C with the folks from Bambuza, and our friend Daniel Wen, the owner of Bambuza Vietnam Kitchen, has coordinated that same activity again. So this Friday, February 16th, we'll have dancers doing the traditional lion dance. They are from the White Lotus Dance Company. It's a lot of fun. Folks behind security get a chance to really engage in a neat part of the celebration of the Lunar New Year. And then finally, Providence Health plans to open an express care facility at PDX just past the ABC security gate on the south side. I was out there yesterday. It looks like it's almost ready to go. It's opening on February 22nd. The facility will offer access to over-the-counter medicines and video conferencing with doctors for both travelers and PDX employees. So we're really excited about it. You might recall we talked about our efforts to try to get something like that about 18 months ago, and so we're really excited it's come together with Providence. And that, Madam President, is the end of my report.
Thanks, Curtis. I'll call for a motion and second to accept for approval of the executive director's report.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We're going to open the meeting for public comment. I don't think anyone signed up. Does anyone? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to our first general discussion item. Kristen Leonard, please. Thank you.
There we go. Good morning. We wanted to spend a couple moments this morning visiting with all of you about a strategic planning process that we've been going through for the last, what do you think, about 4 months, 5 months? And Scott's going to give you a bit of an update, but I wanted to share before we get into that a little bit of the intention of this process. And while we call it a strategic planning process, it was a little bit more what I would characterize as a refresh. And I found the other day a definition that I think really captured our intent as we entered this process and kind of how we were thinking about our strategic plan moving forward. And I wanted to share that with you really quickly. The strategic planning process, a systematic process of envisioning a desired future and translating this vision into broadly defined goals or objectives. And I really think that that's what we were able to achieve. This was a process that Scott will go through that was not just the executive team, but we tried to also pull in senior managers and others to make sure that we were getting a lot of great input. So when I characterize a refresh, many of you may have been part of or seen the strategic plan that came out in 2016. What we decided to do is work with the Coraggio Group. Once again, they had helped us with this process, take all of the work that was done with this original strategic plan and help us kind of, I would say, condense it into what are those big things the organization really wants to lean in on moving forward. Where do we see, what is our desired outcome, our vision, and how do we make sure that that's really clear for all of us in figuring out how our work fits into our future here at the Port. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Scott Drum. And Scott is our Director of Research and Strategic Analysis here at the Port, and he's going to go through this process and what we came up with. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning. We start our strategic planning process by looking at our mission. The mission, of course, gives us guidance on a day-to-day basis, but it also provides us with some scope and some focus for the strategic plan. So we use this as the base building block from which other elements cascade. Sitting in between the mission and the strategic plan itself are our guiding principles and values that are the how. In other words, they describe how we do the work that we do. There will be another presentation on the values that will give you some background onto those, so I won't spend much time on those. But the guiding principles really are 5 elements, 3 legs of sustainability, safety, and operational excellence. And each of these have appeared in the last strategic plan, and most appeared in the plan prior to that. This time, however, we thought that if we pulled them out and set them above the strategic plan, it would give them greater visibility, and it would emphasize that these are the lenses through which we need to view all of our work, not just the strategic priorities, but everything we do on a day-to-day basis as well. So it gave that added emphasis. And at the same time, then it allowed us to focus our work on the strategic plan on describing the what, or the what it is that we do. And this is the what. This is the strategic plan. And as Kristen said, this was developed by the executive team with a small group of senior managers and with input from other employees around the port. We identified what we felt were the 3 big strategic priorities the port needed to deliver on over the next 5 years. Include building an airport for the future, making sure that we are able to deliver on all of the elements that comprise the PDX Next program, all the while not losing sight of that extraordinary passenger experience that everyone has come to expect at PDX. Revitalizing the marine business, creating and executing terminal business development plans that look not only at market opportunities for marine cargo, but also how to optimize the assets we have at those facilities. At the same time, we'll continue the work that we've already begun to develop adaptable and sustainable options for shippers, particularly around the area of ocean container shipping. And our final focus area, leveraging the port's strengths to create a more equitable and prosperous region. This really is about the port bringing its skill set to bear to help the region address some of its biggest challenges, and to do so with a focus on outcomes that create greater equity and greater prosperity. And we'll do that through staking a leadership position in Portland Harbor cleanup, creating a brand new industrial development strategy and program, and providing leadership in the state's transportation future as it relates to the movement of people and goods. And again, we will do all 3 of those things with an eye to outcomes that create a more equitable and prosperous region. From each of these focus areas and initiatives will flow strategies and tactics, business plans, and project plans. And therefore, we would expect that much of what comes to commission over the next 2 years will reflect these priorities and provide additional detail on those strategies, tactics, and plans behind each of these elements. That said, this framework also allows us the flexibility to adapt. We can adapt to changing priorities, make course corrections, and the executive team has committed to reviewing the plan every 6 to 12 months so that we are able to make tweaks or major changes when and where needed. And finally, as we go into the implementation phase, our last 2 tasks will be to assign ownership and accountability and identify metrics and targets. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
We'll open it up for discussion. I know that I appreciate the fact that there's a new look at how this asset of the state, which is so important to economic development, will affect all of the communities that it touches and serves. And I appreciate that that's been built into the strategic plan.
I would also commend just the conceptual framework here. My experience with organizations undergoing some strategic repositioning is that they also are very cognizant of where there's the greatest opportunity to advantage these changes. And it's not so much what's broken, but where's the greatest opportunity to sort of enhance and enlarge. Can you talk a little bit about that? I've always believed that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if the culture is not embracing or not there, it makes it very difficult to take full advantage of things. Are you comfortable that you also bring that as an asset to this work?
I want to make sure that I'm answering your question appropriately. And from this standpoint of the culture, I think one of the things we really tried to do with this process is figure out, and we'll get into this a little bit later as well with our values work that was going on at exactly the same time. What are those things that we feel like we're doing well now and we just want to do it even better? And what are those things that are more aspirational and that we need to lean in on the culture within the organization to aspire to outcomes? I would say, even within the strategic plan, that same kind of framework comes to play. There are some things that we know how to do. We know how to do a brownfield cleanup. Granted, there's still a lot always to learn, but we know how to do that. We've got the tools and skills. What we need to be aspiring to or kind of leaning in is, what does it mean as we're engaging on brownfield cleanup at the Portland Harbor? What does that mean to really do the wraparound to make sure it's equitable and creates prosperity for the region? if that makes sense. So there's aspirational, and it also captures those things that we're doing well and we need to lean in and even do it better. I'm not sure if I answered your question with that, but it was a big part of how we approached this.
No, it did answer it, and I guess my curiosity is that you will have metrics for the tightest part of that circle.
You bet.
What will be, I mean, how will you know that you've gotten there when you begin to look at this expanded aspirational zone of impact?
And we are in the process of figuring that out, to be perfectly candid with you. We are spending a lot of time with our partners in the region, trying to learn what is the best, and I'll focus in on the last area of focus. How do you measure your impacts? What does that look like? What elements are you measuring to make sure that we are creating a more equitable and prosperous region? Everyone's kind of trying to figure that out right now, and so when Scott referenced the fact that we're going to spend the next several months really coming up with a plan and metrics to move forward, that's going to be a tough one, and we're reaching out to a lot of different partners to see if we can wrap our arms and minds around what does that look like moving forward.
Well,
We're
let me
excited
say first,
about it.
that's big work, and I do commend you, but that's big work.
It is. It is. So we will be looking for a lot of feedback from a lot of different partners, and any recommendations from the commission. We are always open as well. So we'd love ideas of others to sit down with.
So, a comment. It seems from the little bit that's out there currently about the federal infrastructure plan, it's going to rely a lot on local money and private-public partnerships. I think the port's in a desirable position to provide leadership in those areas, but I think how the port does that with local business, local governments, because it's both a funding and a coordination issue to get the infrastructure done, will be critically important. I think in that third category, I mean, maybe the bullet serve as leaders in the state's transportation future is it, but it'd be nice to see how that may be planned to do with both the state and the local governments and the private entities. So,
Absolutely. We appreciate that. Many opportunities on the horizon, and the how we enter is going to be really important to those conversations.
Yeah, thank you very much. If you go back just one more slide, in terms of a larger picture, strategic plan. Yes, and I just want you to educate me a little bit further from a semantic perspective. For example, if you did not include a value instead of guiding principles and continued all the way down, what would be the difference? So what is the big difference between the principles and the values there, semantically speaking?
So the values, and Stan is going to spend some time rolling out the values and the work that we did and what led us to this, these three values. I would say the values are the maybe intention of the organization, what we believe we stand for. Some of those we feel like we're doing very well. Some of those, again, are aspirational. The guiding principles are the lens through that we want to apply to the projects and our work. And I don't know if that's giving you enough distinction between the two. And let me give a little clarity. In the past, in this document, we had equity called out as an area of focus or an initiative itself. We had safety, if I recall correctly, called out as its own initiative. What we recognized is we want to start applying those guiding principles to that lens to all of the projects that are on our strategic plan and other projects within the port. Certainly, we did not think they should be a strategy unto themselves. They should be a lens through which we approach all of our projects. I don't know, Commissioner, if that is at all, clear as mud, right? But that is the frame with which we entered the creation of the guiding principles for our projects and work.
Good enough, thank you. Like inclusion to me, more like a part of equity.
Yeah.
It's very similar notion right there. So I didn't see a very clear distinction. Again, I'm not as good as you are, so that's why.
Oh, no. There is not necessarily, I would say equity is one of the elements of inclusion. It fits therein.
Thank you.
Madam President, may I chime in here and just, I think Kristen described it well. To some extent, I think you can look at the principles as the operational guides for, as Kristen described it, how you're doing each of the things that you do. And the values, I think, notionally could change over time. What we are trying to do, and Stan will talk with you a bit about what our new values are versus the older version, which I think were 7 that were a little more generic. The idea of the values is that that's this cultural piece that Michael is describing, where culture eats strategy. I think it was Peter Drucker, one of the management gurus, who came up with that, essentially, that the next slide of the what you do will be irrelevant if you aren't clear on what you believe and how you do things. And so that's really this sort of, the values is more of a cultural, and the guiding principles are more of the operational. And there, clearly there's some crossover there.
I understand. Good luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Any further discussion on this item? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Stan Waters will present the second general discussion item.
So now that Curtis and Kristen have covered the values,
Thank you for your time, Stan.
I'll be brief. No, as Kristen mentioned, this last fall when we were updating the strategic plan and doing that work, and also we were in the middle of the development of our equity policy, which Bobby and Stephen are going to share later. We also started an effort to review what our current values were. And this effort included all of the executives and a number of, not all the senior managers, but a number of the senior managers. And today I'm here to share the outcome of those efforts and to share and present what our new values are. But before I get to that moment, I do want to kind of take you through the process on how we arrived to our new values. So as background, the current port values were last updated in 2008, so they were about 10 years old. And as Curtis mentioned, we had 7 values. And I'm not going to go through each one of them. You can see them on the slide, but as Curtis mentioned, these values, when we first looked at them, they didn't really distinguish us from almost any other company. And therefore, they were pretty generic, as Curtis mentioned, and really could represent maybe any company in America. And one, there were too many. They were hard to remember, and they were basically outdated. And we determined that we needed values that would provide a more clearer focus for the organization. So our challenge, we really wanted to develop a set of core values that would inspire employees and move them to action, because we realized that the current values weren't all really that inspiring. So to kind of go back through the process we went through, what are core values? They're part of an organization's DNA. They establish a company's principles, their standards of behavior, and it really is what's truly important to an organization. They're fundamental, enduring, and actionable. They provide, we've talked about lenses, they do provide a lens to help drive priorities and decisions. And they also help determine how an organization spends its time and resources. So why do you need core values? Core values help to establish the climate in the workplace, and they also help determine how success is defined and measured. Core values are a driver of organizational culture, and culture itself is a primary driver for innovation. So when we sat down to update our values, we really had several goals in mind. We wanted to make our values meaningful to employees. We wanted them to be simple and easy to remember. They should reflect the desired culture as well as what we hold dear. And we wanted our new values to be something that we would not compromise on. And in other words, for them to be really core values of the organization. And once established, we wanted to weave them into everything we do. So after much discussion, testing with a broader group, and much refinement, we came up with these 3 core values: leadership, inclusion, and service. We also developed 3 descriptors for each of the values in order to provide context for the employees to understand what they really mean. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of the descriptors, but if I was to look at leadership, for instance, we listen first. And what that really is to mean is that we have lots of stakeholders that are interested in the work we do here at the port. And we want to make sure that we're listening to all of those voices as we go about doing our work. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to agree with everything we hear, but what we do hear, we're going to take into consideration as we go about doing our work. The second one up there, we take risks to engineer big change. This one really says that we're not afraid to take on big challenges. And we realize that big challenges do come with risks. But leaders don't shy away from big challenges. And if you look at some examples here, we just talked about one. We took a very leadership position in the Lower Willamette work up to this point, and we still are taking a leadership position. Does it have a lot of risk? It definitely does, but we're not going to shy away from it. Another one more recently was the decisions we all made to reopen services at T6. Another big challenge, and it has some risks associated with it. And so that's what we mean by that descriptor. And then the last one under leadership, we're humble and we learn from our mistakes. No one's perfect. Mistakes are made. And if we make a mistake, we're going to admit to it. We're going to own up to it. We're going to learn from it because we know we'll be better for it. So those are the 3 values, and now we have started already implementing some of it. We've already embedded it into our port strategic plan, as you just heard. We've already incorporated it into our employee recognition program. We will be incorporating it into our recruitment process and also into our new employee onboarding program. And then later this year, we will be embedding them into all of our divisions and department equity plans, which you'll be hearing more about from Bobby and Stephen when they present that agenda item later this morning. And so that's kind of the process we went through. We like the 3 values. They're simple to remember. There's not as many of them. And one thing I would also say is we talked about that if you look at leadership and service, that those are 2 of the values that are fairly ingrained already in our DNA here at the port. And it was mentioned earlier that really inclusion is more of an aspirational value for us. We've really just begun on that journey, and we're just really starting to embed it into our organizational culture. So we're on a path with that one. I think that's it. So if there's any questions.
Thanks, Dan. Any discussion, questions?
I really like the simplicity and the single words. I think single words are hard in all these discussions because you'll get 10 years out from this and you'll think, gosh, that's a pretty generic term and what that really mean. As I look at those columns, at least in the first 2, leadership to me that's really important is thoughtful leadership. That can include a lot of things. And inclusion is really meaningful inclusion, not just a word. So I just suggest you really think hard about whether one word is really the way you want to go for a long-term strategy, or if that one word that's the right word needs a descriptor along with it.
We did, during the development of it, as I said, we had much discussion, lots of input from others, and a lot of refinement. And I would say we started out exactly like that, Jim. And what it came down to when we started talking to employees and other managers, they really liked the idea of the simplicity of the 3 words and the descriptors. That doesn't mean we won't change in the future, but it was definitely a topic of discussion as we developed it.
Right.
Yeah, again, I like the clarity of it. I like the fact that people are going to be able to reflect on it very easily. I support Commissioner Carter's caution in that leadership was also a predecessor value. And at no point, I don't think the intention was to say, well, we're bringing that over because it doesn't need to change. This is a very different framing of leadership
Yes.
than in the previous iteration. And so you don't want to miss the opportunity to have people understand it differently. Because it's been around for a while, it could mean what it meant the last time, or it could mean what its intention to mean now. Thoughtful leadership, servant leadership. I mean, there are ways to really just put a point on it to say that there's been a slight evolution from what we know we've learned in the past. So I would just encourage you, because I do think, again, the simplicity of it can have the nuance that you're trying to communicate lost.
Yeah, there's definitely, as we went through this, simplicity was one of our goals, because we realized that the employees with the 7, one, they weren't that meaningful to them, and they couldn't really remember them. If you asked an employee, can you state the 7 values of the port? As we went through this, simplicity, trying to capture that when there's so many bullets that could go under leadership, and there's so many bullets that can go under inclusion and service. So we really tried to hit what was important, knowing that a lot of what goes underneath those areas, we're not. I hope we don't lose them, as you've stated, but there's definitely a lot more to it than just 3 descriptors for each one. But we did want to not make it lengthy and confusing.
Any further discussion? Thank you, Stan.
You bet.
We're going to move on to the consent items on the agenda. I want to ask if any commissioner wants a presentation on the consent items which were included in the materials for this month's meeting. Okay. If not, I'll read the titles of the consent items, and then I'll call for a motion in second. First consent item is the 2018 Port of Portland Transportation Improvement Plan, and the second is the Forest Grove Cornelius Enterprise Zone Boundary Amendment. Any motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now I'll call on Bobby Stedman to introduce our first agenda item.
Morning. Stephen and I are loving this conversation around culture so far. So I think we're hoping that we're going to have a really healthy dialogue with you around what we're proposing today, which is we're basically here to seek approval for the port social equity policy, which will help prioritize our commitment to social equity, and will also direct the port to create a set of guidelines to implement and integrate social equity into our work. Before I introduce Stephen, though, I'd like to just sort of take you back in time a little bit. I'll give you a little bit of history regarding the state. Prior to the port's establishment in 1891, sort of bring you back before that point, and then also sort of take you to current time, just to give you a little feedback of why equity is important. You may know that on this date, actually February 14th, 1859, is when Oregon became a state. It was the only state at that time to be admitted into the Union that had an exclusion law written into its constitution. This basically meant that Oregon residents voted against slavery, but excluded free Negroes from the state. Then in 1866, Oregon passed the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to African Americans, but was then rescinded 2 years later, keeping its exclusion law language in place. Then in 1870, the 15th Amendment, which granted black men the right to vote, was added to the U.S. Constitution despite failing to pass in all states except Oregon and California. This federal law superseded a clause in the Oregon State Constitution, but the ban remained written in the Oregon Constitution. Additional failed attempts were made to amend the Oregon Constitution to remove its ban on black suffrage in 1883, 1895, and 1916, much of which were still in place until the year 2000. In 2000, Oregon's finally voted to remove all racist language from its constitution, which still had a clause that read, "No free Negro or mulatto not residing in the state at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall come, reside, or be within the state or hold any real estate." It wasn't until 2002 that Oregon's voted on a ballot measure to finally remove all historical language from the state's constitution. It was ballot measure 14, and it passed 70-30. That was in 2002, and it's just amazing to me that in 2002, it was 70-30. Now, I share this with you because it's important to understand that prior to 2000, inequitable policies and practices were embedded in government institutions, resulting in many social inequities that persist today. The port is a government entity, so it includes us. We are part of that. You saw previously in the strategy side or slide around our mission, which is to enhance regional prosperity. We're a government institution. We're responsible for enhancing regional responsibility, and therefore we have an obligation to the community to remove institutional and systemic barriers that have resulted in inequities for historically underserved populations. So I really just wanted to give you that framework, because it really helps sort of understand why we're here. We're here, and we want to share with you some work that we've done over the last 3 years and the work that we have ahead of us to really look at breaking down those institutional barriers that were really baked into a lot of the work that we do. So I'm going to introduce Stephen Nakana. Stephen is our Social Equity Program Manager, and he's going to walk you through a little bit of history as well, and then also share some of the work that we've done over the last 3 years and really all of the work that we have ahead of us.
Thank you, Bobby, for the introduction. Madam President, Commissioners, good morning. As introduced, my name is Dr. Stephen Nakana. I'm the Social Equity Program Manager. I have two main goals for my presentation today. First of all, I'm going to update you on the progress that we've made in designing the Social Equity Program. And then after that, I'm going to ask your approval for the Social Equity policy that we've drafted. But before I go there, let me walk you through my agenda for this morning. I'm going to show you how the port's makeup has changed over the years. Then I'm going to talk about why and how the port began the social equity conversation, which has brought us to me being here today. And I'll give the business case or the rationale for why the social equity policy is needed here at the port. And thereafter, I am going to talk about how we are going to measure program success. And I want to emphasize program success. And then after that, I'll request your approval because the reason why I'm emphasizing program success, we tend to be asked for those metrics out there, and we're designing a program. And I'll get into that a little bit later. So, as you know, the port was established in 1891 by the Oregon legislature. And our first female commissioner was Elo Bonhardy, who served between 1975 and 1979. And our first racially diverse commissioner was Sam Naito, who served between 1977 and 1981. And our first female commission president was Judy Johansson, who served between 2007 and 2007 to 2012. And our first female and racially diverse commission president is none other than Madam President right there, right now, who is going to serve, who started serving from last year and hopefully longer than we would like you to serve. So why and how did the port start its social equity journey? The port started its social equity journey in and around 2013, and we can actually go back some years as well. And basically, the conversations around equity here started at the port when a number of public agencies were looking at the delivery of equitable services within our region. We also had stakeholder groups that came to speak here at commission meetings around social equity issues here at the port and also in our region. And these stakeholder groups met with the PDX Community Advisory Committee, and this is such a big acronym, so I'm hoping people will remember when I say PDX-CAC, I mean our PDX Community Advisory Committee. They had discussions and they attended meetings with the PDX Community Advisory Committee, and as I indicated here at Commission, to talk about what the port could do around social equity issues. Those discussions here at the port elevated the discussion on what the port could be doing and looking at how to explore opportunities on social equity issues. And so in 2013, the port established, the PDX Community Advisory Committee established an ad hoc committee that really was tasked to explore how the port can look at existing programs and how they related to social equity, and how the port also can use social equity to try and influence tenants here at the port and people that we partner with, and also to look at broader social equity issues in our community. And in around 2015 and 2014, the PDX-CAC, met for about 8 times to really explore on how the port could look at these social equity issues. And they also made recommendations, which I'll share a little bit later in 2015.
You need to go back.
Oh, I need to
You're
go
off
back.
the slide, yeah, let's go back. Go back on your clicker. There you go.
Oh, apologies.
Okay. You're right. Sorry. There you go. All right. You had the right page. Just
I had the
slide.
right
Yeah.
page. So, whilst the PDX-CAC was meeting, the port started spending time to really begin to explore and for the port to learn what it could do around social equity. And the port spent a few resources so that the port can really investigate this concept of social equity. The port hired Good Company, an Oregon-based consulting firm, which is based in Eugene. It's an environmental firm, really, that is interested in the triple bottom line approach. And the firm basically was tasked to assess what best practices people in government, marine, aviation, and other transporting sectors were doing around social equity. We also hired another consultant, another Oregon-based consultant called Innovative Growth Solutions, or IGS. And this organization basically deals with organizational transformation change. And they were hired to look at the port's HR processes and programs, and also to provide us with some ideas on how to do equity work. And they also led some, diversity and equity discussions with some port employees here at the port. And we also compensated several community organizations here in Oregon, or rather Portland, which included the Urban League, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, or APANO, as some people might know. And we also compensated Latino Network, the North and Northeast Portland Business Associations, really to conduct some surveys and opinions around social equity and how the port could also really look at what we could do around social equity. And as I indicated, in 2015, all these stakeholders provided us with recommendations, and basically the recommendations from Good Company included the following: assign clear social equity program ownership by an executive or team member on the executive team, establish a management structure that could oversee the work, and the port would have to define what social equity would mean for the port and relate it to the port's mission and vision and all the work that we do. And it also included establishing a strategic framework on how that social equity work could be done, and also designing a tracking and evaluation mechanism, and also a reporting and communicating mechanism on how we are going to be doing this work. And another recommendation that they included is that the port should go beyond compliance in setting up aspirational goals to match regional demographics for employees and in our contracting operations in terms of business. And they also suggested that we should involve peer and community organizations in the design of the social equity program, because we can pat ourselves on the shoulder, but if people out there don't regard what we're doing, we're not doing so well. So the recommendations from IGS included, to fill commission and executive positions with culturally diverse candidates, and set goals for increasing diversity at all levels in all departments here at the port. Excuse me, I need to grab some water. The other recommendation also included dedicating resources for diversity and inclusion work here at the port. And they also recommended that we develop a culture of inclusivity at the port. They also suggested or recommended that we develop strategies that attract, retain, and develop a diverse workforce. And recommendations from the Community Advisory Committee basically included hiring a social equity program manager, creating an organizational social equity strategy, and reporting annually on progress toward equity goals here at the port. One other recommendation they included was consider a template for social equity considerations that could be voluntarily used with certain size projects here at the port, or that the port will be engaged in. The executive team fully embraced these recommendations, and they began incorporating social equity considerations or discussions in our fiscal years 2016 to 2020 strategic plan discussions. And between, I think I'm moving too quick here, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Between 2015 and 2016, the discussions here at the port moved from being tactical to transformational, because, two program managers were hired. So me, the social equity program manager, and my colleague, Dot Klingman, who's our diversity and inclusion program manager. And we started really leading the port on conversations on what equity is and what diversity is. And we've created an employee group of 29 employees. And now there's other people that have been put on the committee, and it's called the Pop Culture Team. And really that team is helping to really try to inculcate or to raise more awareness on what social equity, diversity, and inclusion work is all about. And so we've been also preparing that organization, and this work started from the time I was hired and the time that Dot was hired. And we are also beginning to integrate really social equity thinking in how we are doing some of our business initiatives, and some of the things that we've done already is trying to include how to include social equity in our RFPs, including, for example, our commercial team before they, during a business transaction process, they do what they call a business transaction something, can't remember the acronym now, the full definition. Isaac, my colleague here, will help me later, but it's a batch process, and really that batch process, they've integrated some equity considerations in there that I think is helping teams to really think about social equity issues. All right, and I will move on. And so what kind of organizational changes have we made thus far since the time that Dot and I were hired? In 2017, we created a new division called Administration and Equity, or A&E. The reason why this division was created was that the social equity work was basically it was under 3 executive team members, and we wanted to consolidate the work that was done, and so that even the reporting structure could be streamlined and the work could be cohesive. We also, over a 6-month period, did a deep dive social equity assessment through the Intertwine Alliance that convened a group of stakeholders, and I know some of my stakeholder friends are here, so all protocol recognized. And we, over a 6-month period, we really did a scan from organizational leadership, hiring practices, and all that. And we are analyzing that information, and it's also influencing on how we're going to do our work moving forward. And the executive team also, in October last year, went to an offsite with an organization that is coming out of Portland. It's a thought leader called PolicyLink. And through their own discussions, they helped to redraft our social equity policy and to develop some implementation guidelines, which are here with you. And we also really did extensive stakeholder engagement after the social equity policy was drafted. We gave the policy and implementation guidelines to our community stakeholders because it was one of the recommendations that we were asked to do. And we also launched a disparity study through our small business development program. Basically, the disparity study is a study that looks at the variance or disparities for utilization of women and minority small business owners here in our region, and if there's any disparities done and how to include them. And I know you've heard that properly from my colleague Kimberly, so if I haven't described that very well, Kimberly, we can have lunch later. And so this is where we are right now in terms of the progress made. Now, you might be asking, well, if we have made so much progress, why is a social equity policy needed? For us, we recognize that social equity work is a journey. It's individual or personal, it's institutional, and it's organizational. And it's a journey that needs to be transformative if we can help to contribute to equitable outcomes in the region. And as Bobby really walked us through our history, we know that these social inequities that we experience or racial inequities that we experience are not accidental. We, the people that are sitting in this room, might not have been responsible for them, but we work in organizations that basically played a role in contributing to these outcomes that we experience. And we think it is within our mission and also our obligation to help to contribute to achieve equitable outcomes in the region. And so this is why our social equity policy also uses race or racial equity as a way of how we are going to do work. And sometimes people would ask, but why racial equity? Sometimes it might appear that we want to be exclusionary the counter is actually what we're interested in. We want racial equity because we believe that we've got a responsibility to achieve equitable outcomes for everybody in our region. But we know that not everybody can be given the same opportunities. So we want to use racial equity because we know by attacking the biggest elephant in the room, we are going to develop tools and frameworks and even ideas to help us tackle those other barriers that people are doing. Now, does that mean that we're just going to concentrate on that? This work is not linear. Even though we are taking race as our starting point, we are already working on dismantling some of the barriers that other social groups that are facing. We are taking racial equity because it is the first time that we're doing this work. We are creating a foundation, and we want this program to be sustainable as the port moves forward in its mission to enhance the region's economy and quality of life for everybody. So here's a summary of our social equity policy. And by adopting the social equity policy, basically, it confirms our commitment to social equity, or rather to racial equity. And sometimes I know I've also been asked, so how are you going to be accountable? To me, this policy is one accountability that the port is showing that we're serious about this work. And it also affirms our commitment that we are going to really seriously take a racial equity lens in how we make decisions. And also the policy directs port staff to develop administrative guidelines of how to integrate social equity considerations and goals in decision-making processes. And we are hoping through this policy also, we can also ensure our accountabilities to our accountability to ourselves, but also to the community out there. So with your approval, with this, sorry, before I actually ask for that, what are we going to be doing next in 2018? I've got some colleagues of mine that are also in the audience from Resolution Northwest. They are going to be leading port employees on some implicit bias trainings. And through those trainings, after the trainings are completed, you heard from Stan's presentations as well, each and every department is going to develop a social equity developmental plan. That's a second level of commitment and accountability, because in those plans, we want each and every department to be able to identify how they're going to work to meet the port's social equity program outcomes. And that, for me, is what and how we are going to measure program success. So it will be an indicator, because they will have to come up with the way that that department is going to help the port to move or to achieve those social equity outcomes, because they know what they do. And our thinking is that once they have those equity plans, then we can begin to have a deeper discussion on saying, what will be our metrics outside to showcase that we are contributing to social equity outcomes, and then we can begin to talk about metrics as they move forward. And so that will be the work that will start between October, September this year. And through that, our executive director, we are asking for approval of the Social Equity Policy 6.1.16. And as we say where I'm coming from, asante sana Nkosi Kakulu for having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nakana. And Bobby, I think it's important to say, particularly on this day, it's important to reflect on the history of this state in particular, which was established as a white homeland, and which, the effects of that policy sort of infuse the history of the state and its institutions, given the port's status as really one of the main economic drivers in the state. I think establishing policies really has an effect, a real effect on the citizens of the state. And so the policies can truly be impactful here. I've seen lots of data, as you mentioned, about tackling the racial lens and how that has effects on other communities as well, both with respect to gender, queer communities, veteran status, differently abled communities. So I commend that effort as well. And I open for the rest of the commissioners if there are any comments or questions. Please.
Yes, I really appreciate and admire all the work going into this. Congratulations, moving forward here. I'm excited to see this progress. And also, I wonder if there would be any consideration of maybe looking at this as one of the values that we add to the list.
And we have equity listed as one of the guiding principles, and inclusion as listed as a value. Obviously, there's overlap in that. So we're thinking or hoping that we have that is embedded into our strategic thinking.
Fair enough.
And certainly as we move forward with the equity plans, I think as mentioned previously, when we look at the equity plans, we will be looking at them from the lens also of those guiding principles and those values. Yeah, thank you.
I have one. Thank you very much for a very profound presentation, both of you. You said, Stephen, you're going to talk about how some of the outcomes will be measured, but you did not, because that's subject to, I guess, the October, November timeframe, further discussions within the management and staff, right? So I look forward to receiving another report on that.
So are we.
Yes, and I didn't mention, so part of our responsibility is also going to our PDX Community Advisory Committee, because they were instrumental in not only the creation of my position, but for making sure that this work is started. And also one of our commitment is to come to commission, because this is a commission policy almost on a yearly basis, to tell you how we are doing.
Our expectation is that from May to September, departments and divisions will be working on their equity plans. And we will use some of the information that Stephen alluded to in the intertwined conversations when we were doing the organizational assessment. We'll use that information or provide that information to departments when they're creating their equity plans. So we're looking at doing that between May and September. And then the executive team between October and the end of the year will look at all of those plans, and there'll probably be some common themes within them, and identify what are the metrics we want to use to measure our progress. And we expect that early 19 is we'll come back to the commission and share the results of those equity plans and how we will, and get your input and approval on how we would measure our success.
Yeah, I also commend you. I think this is exciting work. It's big work, as my favorite expression. And I also would say that the focal point on racial equity is a good starting place, a good focal point. I'm also aware that when we talk about these type of inequities, there's an intersectionality between race and housing status, economic status. One area that I would hope that as you continue this work, you look at closely is the intersectionality between race and disability status. I think we can be so focused on traditional elements that we miss the opportunity to understand that many people's lives take them into a number of different spaces. And I think we have an obligation and an opportunity here as well to look to see how the rise of sort of elevation or benefits can impact this population as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, that hasn't escaped me in terms of doing this work. And it is something that is conscious and I'm aware of. And for me right now is how do we create a foundation and framework and tools for the port to begin to understand how to do this work. The interesting thing or the unique thing about the port is we know how to build capital things. We don't know how to build a social program. And I regard my program as a social program. This is why I'm saying I'm concerned about program success. What are the skeletal things do we need to have to even engage folks to be able to see that intersectionality? And as I indicated, though, this work is not linear. I'm starting off somewhere, but I know what I'm going to be including in terms of dismantling those barriers. But it is a it was nice articulated comment. keeps me up at night. And I would joke, commissioners, it looks like I've got job security.
And to add to Stephen's point, I think when we create our equity plans, we have to be mindful of who's in the room with us creating those equity plans. Because if it's just all port employees sitting in the room creating their equity plans, we're going to get one perspective. And I think, depending on the department division that's working on their equity plans, we probably need to bring in external stakeholders, communities of impact into those conversations so that we make sure that we have a very thoughtful conversation about what those equity plans will look like.
So I think this is a really big moment. I truly think that this is, for the port and the people we impact, what I'd call a seminal moment. And it is the port's opportunity to do the leadership that we talk about and to do it thoughtfully. And in the end, though this is a very long, complex path that we've created for ourselves, I mean, linked back to history, but really looking forward, we can help young people in particular to see that there are no doors except those they create themselves to their opportunities. And if there's pride in this process, because it does accomplish things, because we do have accountability, and we can look in 2 years and 4 years and 6 years at what's been done, the whole team will feel pride about that. And that's a terrific opportunity. So thank you for taking this on. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, you mentioned stakeholders, and I think one important thing we'll need to keep our eye on here is this policy and the review as you go forward may help us identify new stakeholders that have not been considered before, and communities that may not consider themselves stakeholders now, who will raise their hand and try to participate, and we need to be aware of that and be willing to give them space to provide input to this process. So let's make sure that there's that ability. Any other comments? I want to make sure before we move for action here, if there is anyone that wants to provide comment or any additional information on this policy. Okay. Seeing none, I'll call for a motion and second for adoption of the policy. Sorry, there is someone?
Folks in the...
Yes, please, come forward. Please come forward and let us know who you are. And
Okay. Good morning. My name is Kofi Desu. I am the interim director for the Office of Equity and Human Rights, City of Portland. And I know Steve as a partner in this equity movement before I became interim director about 2 months ago. I want to commend the Commission and the work that the Port of Portland is doing. The City of Portland has started this movement a few years ago, but the Office of Equity and Human Rights started in 2012. And it has been a journey, but I am proud that we have made a lot of progress today. So I can see where the Port of Portland is going, starting with this social equity policy. This is the best way to institutionalize the culture of equity in the Port of Portland. And then when I hear that there is the intention to create plans, equity plans, which is the next step. The City of Portland has been through those steps. Right now we are operationalizing those plans and monitoring the progress. And we have made mistakes. So in this, the implementation of the enforcement of policies and implementation of the plans, expect mistakes to be made and be tolerant for those mistakes, but that's how we can measure our progress.
right now, the city of Portland is in the budget season, and we are using an equity tool to assess the impact of the budget allocations on the people that we serve. So I believe that the Port of Portland is, taking the right path. I recognize, some people in the commission, my brother Michael here, who is a mentor for me. Maybe he didn't know that from distance. So I came here to say thank you for doing this work and joining this equity movement. It's not just you. It's a national movement. It's a global movement. And we are proud that we have a partner in this movement. So I don't know if I said things well, but I'm so excited about this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Any further comments? Thank you. Hearing none, I'm going to ask for a motion. Sorry, there is.
There is another comment.
Please.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kurt Jun. I serve as the Diversity and Inclusion Director at Portland General Electric, and I was invited here and was informed of this event, and I think a very historical moment for the Port of Portland. I'm happy to see Mr. Alexander here, and I just want to echo the sentiments of what Bobby had shared, as well as Dr. Steve. We're embarking, even just as a utility company, of how do we embed this work into the operational fabric of how we do business. And in the past, there's been a promotion of this value and principle that have been conducted in ways in which we're trying to get people to buy into doing what is right. But that approach has taken a very long journey in that what many of the corporations and organizations are having to conduct is a business. It is a business. And so when there can be a connection of the dots where equity drives and stimulates the economy. We had a Stanford business economist who did a state of Oregon research on the disparity of the educational racial achievement gap. And the formula in which he had come up with, and it was on the front page of the Oregonian, was the fact that the racial achievement gap, even in our city, is costing this state $2 billion a year. And so I just want to echo and support the good work that you're all doing, as well as what we're trying to do at PGE, as well as what other organizations are trying to do, because this work has a direct tie to the economic sustainability of the state. And I think you're all doing a wonderful job. So thank you for this time.
Thank you. Please.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Philip Wu. I'm a retired physician from Kaiser Permanente, and I'm currently on the community benefit team at that organization. I also happen to sit on several community boards, including the Northwest Health Foundation with my colleague Michael, the Oregon Environmental Council, the Intertwine Alliance, and have participated in the development of Metro's equity strategy a couple of years ago. So I want to commend the Port for this work. I think it's extraordinarily exciting and extraordinarily challenging. I think about the process that Metro went through when it developed its equity strategy, I think a year and a half or 2 years ago, and is now in the process of implementation. And I think the big challenge, of course, is how are you going to measure your impact, and how are you going to be accountable, and actually figuring out to whom you are accountable. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge going forward. But at this particular point, this is incredibly inspiring, and I think it's fantastic work, so I commend you all. Thank you.
Any further comment? Thank you. Hearing none, I'll call for a motion and second on adoption of the social equity policy.
I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And I'll say I think it's an exciting moment, an important one. I think you heard from both members of our community and from the commission sort of an energy around making sure that we move forward beyond policy work here, and I know that the port is committed to that, so we look forward as we move forward to hearing how the work is going and how we're impacting our community. We will call on Vince for our final agenda item.
Good morning. We are here again on the airport maintenance collective bargaining agreement. We were here last month. We went a little out of cycle last time where we had you all approve the proposal before the ratification vote that happened on the same day. Actually, but that particular contract was not approved by the members, so we went back to the drawing board with them and made a couple changes to the program and have since had the members ratify that particular contract. So we are now back here asking for your approval. And Blaze is here with me again, and we'll just talk about the changes that made from the last version of the contract to this one. As you all know, it's a very challenging labor environment out there right now, and we're certainly experiencing that here. So I'll let Blaze go through the details.
Thank you, Vince. Good morning, commissioners. So why we're here essentially and getting at that, DCTU, the District of Council Trade Unions, didn't ratify the tentative agreement in December. When we met after the vote not to ratify, we reached a new tentative agreement in January, and the union ratified that on January 17th. That's what brings us here today. The changes versus what was approved in December, the wages, the retro capping at 6 months, we did that, negotiated that deliberately in an effort to bring this to a close. And the way we did this was 6 months backward from commission approval. So it rests on commission approval, that time frame. Otherwise, it would theoretically keep moving. So that's where the August 18th, 2017 date comes from, as opposed to 7/1/17. An additional mid-year for electrical job classifications, additional bump up of 1.2%. We are also doing that in, it'll be retroactive in 2018 and in 2020. And that's largely to keep pace. The current journeyman base rate here in the Portland area is $42.60. And the base rate in this contract right now is $37.78. So the journeyman private sector rate in Portland, some 12.75% higher than where we're at here. So we're taking that into account, and that's a reason for the difference there. In 7/1/2020 and 21, we raised the base for the minimums from 2.75 in both those years to 3%. Again, moved primarily on the basis of where the market has been moving locally. We provided as well an additional personal leave day under paid time off. The anticipated cost of these changes, and I will show the full chart, the added new money in year 5 from the changes in December, since December, would be $119,640. Through the life of the agreement is $258,627. So looking at that impact here in new dollars, new money, you see that in year 5, that is the 2.4 million. It was at 2.3, and change previously that shows the increase in year 5 over the base year, and the increase in the life of the entire CBA estimated at $750,000, and that's the $250,000 plus look at over the increase in new money over the life of the CBA versus what we looked at in December. The executive director's recommendation is approval to enter into 5-year collective bargaining agreement with the District Council of Trade Unions.
Thank you. Any questions from Commission?
So I just one question here.
Sure.
In at least the materials we have that didn't show, Blaze, in yours, the per person annual increase in wages and benefits is 3.99%. Is that the 5,000?
$5,075. Yes, it was at I believe 48.
Is that a cumulative? How's that calculated?
You take that fifth year amount is showing that 2.4 million there in year 5 is the amount higher than the budget in the base year. So right now,
Okay.
we 2.4 million. Taking that figure of the 2.4 million in year 5, dividing it by 97 and by the 5 years.
Okay.
Get you to that figure per person.
And so that includes both the monetary value of benefits as well as the wage increase?
It includes everything. It's the entire roll-up, fixed cost and variable PERS, looking at wage increases.
Because we've been on kind of a 3% for our own employees over the last few years as a target, going out from that, can we compare this 3.99 to the last bargaining agreement in terms of annual calculated increase?
With this group?
Yeah.
This group's last contract was 3.25.
Okay.
We actually had mid-year increases for the electricians in that bargaining agreement as well. That's the only group we've done that with in the 6 years I've been here. And still, it's actually a good idea that we did that because they would have been further behind the market than they are right now.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? I'd like the minutes to reflect that Commissioner Young had to leave the meeting to catch a flight, so he will not be participating in this motion. So I'd like call for a motion and second if there are no further questions. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I'll call the meeting to a close.
Thank you.